My name is Derek Chell, and I'm the Director of Member Engagement with the Coalition for College. Just so all of you all know, the Q&A feature of Zoom is turned on, so you can actually submit questions throughout the presentation. For those of you all who are not familiar with the Coalition yet, let me share a bit about who we are. So the Coalition is more than 150 colleges and universities with a proven commitment to access, affordability, and student success. Together, we provide a set of tools called My Coalition to help students learn about, prepare for, and apply to college. We believe that coalition schools are smart college choices as they do demonstrate their commitment by providing responsible financial aid and graduating students in a timely manner, including those who have been historically underrepresented in higher education. So coalition schools outperform the national averages when it comes to retention and graduation rates, which are important factors to consider when thinking about the college you want to attend and how much time and money you'll invest in your education. These are some of the reasons why coalition schools are smart college choices and make a great starting point when building and finalizing your college list. As you know, we provide an application that can help you apply to coalition schools, but those aren't the only resources that we offer. So when you create an account, you begin receiving personalized messages to help you through your next steps in the college search and application process, as well as invitations to events and other opportunities just like this one. If you'd like to get that helpful information outside of your inbox, our Instagram account is also a really great resource for advice and news that we curate with help from our admissions and financial aid officers at our member schools. So go ahead and give us a follow there. Also, if you have any additional questions following this webinar, feel free to send us an email at info@coalitionforcollege.org. So now I'm going to go ahead and get started. So joining us today, we have a great group of admissions and counseling professionals who are going to share some of their knowledge and expertise with you about the college application process, particularly testing. So I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves. And since we're talking about testing today, I'm going to ask that they include their top piece of advice on testing or share a testing day ritual or preparation practice. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jessica.
Hi, good afternoon. Great to be here with you all. My name is Jessica Clark, and I'm with the University at Buffalo. And I would say advice I would have in regards to testing would be that if you have the ability to take a test, or if the schools that you are interested in require a test, I would recommend that you take that test more than once. Students do see an increase in their test score once they have a familiarity with that test and what the expectations are, and tend to see a higher score the second time around. And many universities will take the highest combined score even from different test dates. So I definitely would give that piece of advice. If the schools you're interested in offer test optional admissions, if you have the ability to take a test, I still recommend that you do so, because then it'll be your decision if you wish to have that test score considered as part of your evaluation process. If you feel the score you received is a positive reflection of your academic abilities, then I would encourage you to submit that score.
Great. Hi, friends. I think I'm next up on the list. I'm Rhiannon. I use pronouns like she and her, and I'm here today representing Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, which is where I'm coming to you live from today. I would say my best tip when it comes to testing is a little bit of a hot take, but that's why we're here. And I just really like to remind students that tests are not demonstrating your worth as a human being. They are not testing your ability to think and be capable. Tests test your ability to take a specific test. And I know that young Rhiannon found a lot of freedom in trying to reframe my thinking around the test, knowing that you are capable of learning how to take these tests and being able to demonstrate your proficiency at tests, but regardless of what scores you may or are not reflective of your worth or value as a human being. So please do try to remember that throughout the frenzy of this process.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Blair, next up on the list, and I'm the Director of Counseling Services for a high school right outside of St. Louis, Clayton High School. And my advice on testing is a little tip on if you are going to test and you're going to send scores to a school, that can be the most frustrating part aside from maybe getting a spot. So sending the scores, what's really, really important to know is that a lot of times you need to send the scores directly from the testing agency to the actual university. And sometimes that can be really, really tricky on the part of the student. If you start having problems, last year I think that might have been one of the biggest problems was actually the function of getting my score to the school. A couple things, right? Just remember that you own your test scores. Even if you took it through your school For a state test, you own your scores. No one else is going to be able to do that for you. And if you're unable to log in, just a real quick trick, because it happens a lot. A lot of times mom is signing me up for the test. And sometimes when mom is typing in everything, mom types her birthday instead of your birthday. So go back and check that information. Really helpful for parents to, to help you sign up and that kind of thing. But sometimes little mistakes versus when you signed up at school for the state test versus when mom maybe signed you up, all that information might not be exactly the same. And then that's when you get those two accounts and you have a hard time figuring out how to access your score. So just a little tip on sending the scores.
And hi, everyone. I will wrap us up. I am Sarah Urquidez. I oversee college counseling in Dallas and Houston public schools throughout the Dallas area. And I have a bit of advice, not only for testing, but for the application process in general. And it is to control the controllables. So if you are someone who is good at tests, make sure that you're prepared, make sure that you have your admissions ticket ready to go, that you plan enough time to be there, that you take your calculator. We've definitely had students that forgot their calculator and either had to borrow a spare one from a friend that they made in the hallway that day or took the test without a calculator. So make sure that if testing is your thing, that you are ready for that test day. But if testing is not your thing, focus on the parts of the application that you can control, whether that is your academics, that's your activities, that's your essay. Do not stress about this one part of it because you will always be more than your test score and your GPA. But if you are here to hear a little bit more about testing, we are going to answer those questions today. So make sure to drop them in the Q&A for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. So before we turn to the Q&A, let's first take a look at some of the tools and the testing sections inside My Coalition. So adding schools to your college list is one of the first steps you'll take when you create an account. You can search Coalition Schools or any school to create a comprehensive list of all the schools you're interested in. You can use our collaboration feature in the upper right where it says share list to start a conversation with a counselor or other mentor for feedback on your list. For Coalition Schools, you'll have the opportunity to show your interest in that school by opting in to their mailing list. This is an easy way to make sure you're receiving information directly from all the Coalition schools that you're exploring. So adding schools to your college list will also give you updated recommendations on which sections of your profile to prioritize based on the requirements for each of those schools. You'll also notice that there's a send test score bar right there as well. So you can actually link your College Board account to it. And that is so that you can send your official SAT scores to the schools as well. So now let's take a look at the testing sections that are part of your profile in My Coalition. So this includes the sections of the profile relating to testing or any exams that you wish to report. There are 3 of them, as you can see, but depending on the colleges on your list and whether you're applying as a domestic or an international student, you may not need to do all of them, or in some cases, even any of them. So the SAT and ACT section is obviously where you'll report your existing ACT or SAT scores. And then also you can also put in dates for future sittings for those exams. But the additional test section, so this is where you can choose to report AP scores, IB scores, or A-level course exams. And then if you look below there, there's also the English proficiency test section, and that's for reporting TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, or any other English proficiency exams for international students. Okay, so for some schools, yep, so I just wanted to let you all see that screen there. So reporting your scores there, and then just once again, want to emphasize that it's the scores that you wish to report. So it's not required that you report any scores. So make sure that you do take a look at what the schools require, because as I mentioned before, sometimes you might not need to send any of your scores at all. So now when test scores are optional, so for some schools, the SAT and ACT section of the profile is optional. That means you get to decide whether the school will receive any scores that you chose to enter in that section. For those schools, when you start their application, you'll see a screen that looks a bit like this. The language in the middle will be specific to the school and describe more about their specific testing policy. So if you select yes, any information that you reported in the SAT, ACT section will be included with your application to that school when you submit it. And if you select no, the school will not receive any of that information that you reported in the SAT, ACT section. So you don't need to go back and delete it. Once you select no, that information will not be sent to them. So finally, in addition to this session, we have more advice on testing and other topics in My Coalition Counselor on our website. So if you're wondering how to choose whether to take the ACT or SAT or the ins and out on these tests, you can check out these articles on My Coalition Counselor, and we'll drop the links in the chat for you as well. So now we're going to turn it over to the Q&A portion of our workshop today. As I mentioned earlier, the Q&A function is turned on, so please type in your questions there, and we'll aim to answer as many of them as we can in the time that we have left together today. A few of you all did submit some questions to us in advance, so I want to go ahead and cover those first and ask our presenters to answer those. So the first question that I have, I'm actually going to direct to Carolyn. So one student wanted to know, can a high test score make up for having lower grades, particularly in 9th and 10th grade?
Great question. So I think the best thing to remember about test scores is the fact that your test score's job, right, if you're going to use one, is to simply validate your record. So high schools are very, very different, right? An A in one school, a B in another school might mean different things. For the college and university to sort that out, they can look to a test score because it's normed to sort of figure out, is this matching, right? So if you didn't, do your best in 9th and 10th grade, but you turn it on in 11th grade and then 12th grade is looking pretty good, that test score could absolutely validate, you know what, maturity had to set in, but I can do this, right? I'm able to compete in your pool, right? On the other hand, if you had 4 years of not so great grades and this super high test score, that might communicate something else, right, to the school. So just keep in mind that the test score is meant to validate, right? And the other part of test scores is that test scores can often help you financially, right? There are a lot of schools that still absolutely look to those test scores when it comes to handing out those dollars. So it's not a bad idea to test, and like Jessica said, test again to get the best score that you can get.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carolyn. So the next question I'm actually going to direct to Jessica. So a student wanted to know, if I submit my test scores to a college, but then I take the SAT or the ACT after applying and get a better score, can I still submit the score in hopes of getting a better merit scholarship, as Carolyn just mentioned, or to improve their chances of admissions if they haven't received their decision yet?
Great, thank you. And I would say definitely keep track of the schools you're applying to and the different application completion deadlines that they have in place. So there might be multi-layers to answer this question. But yes, once you submit an application and you take additional exams and you receive different scores, you certainly can have those scores sent to those schools and universities for additional consideration. It's a matter of timing and receipt of those scores on whether they will be used in consideration for merit scholarship consideration or acceptance and decisions to the university. So in short, yes, you can submit test scores to add to your application, but also be aware of the application timelines that the schools have, and they may be different by school. So you may have different answers in that term, on those terms, with if they will be considered or not for those scholarships. So just be aware of those additional deadlines in place.
Thank you, Jessica. The next question is for you, Rhiannon. So for test optional schools, how much does your test score really impact your chance of acceptance or getting a scholarship? And if a student thinks that their score is high, should they submit it? And how do they know if they actually have a high score?
I love these multi-pronged questions. There's a lot in there. So if I leave any out, follow up with me, please, Derek. So first, I think to invoke the classic admissions counselor answer, it really depends. So, whether your score is going to be something that's going to make or break a decision at one school or another is really going to depend on the individual institution itself. I will use my institution as an example, but with the strong caveat that it's one school out of many. The good news for you is that the coalition member schools do tend to try to have policies that are going to be as student friendly as we can. So this should be broad, but just like Jessica said, do be sure to be checking in with the individual schools that you're considering, because their policies are going to be different from one school to the other. So at Northeastern, we are test optional this year. When we say we are test optional, we mean we are test optional. So you have the option of deciding whether or not you want your scores to be part of our decision-making process. If you have scores and you feel good about them, awesome. If you want to submit them, fantastic. That will be one of the things we consider, along with your essays and your letter of recommendation and your transcript and who you are as a human and the program you're applying to and all of the other stuff that gets squeezed into that application process. If you have scores and you don't love them, or you don't have scores, then you don't have to submit them. And we're not going to expect you to. We're not going to be upset with you for not submitting scores if you choose not to. That's what test optional really does mean for us. Now, if you have a perfect SAT or ACT score that's the max of their range, that could be a really good thing to submit to the schools that you're considering if they consider those. Because just like Carolyn was saying, that validates the other performance that we're going to see elsewhere in your application. That helps us say, yes, this is a student who's excited about their academics. This is a student who takes their academics seriously. Oh, and they have these scores that indicated that. Fantastic. That's a good thing. Flip side can also be true, right? If you have an academic record that is awesome and shows us that you care about your classes, but then you have a test score that's a little bit lower, and I will circle back to what that means, then you submit that. That might make it a little bit harder for the admissions committee to then say, there's all this evidence in this transcript that this student is strong in an academic setting, but then we have this test score that's below our middle 50% range. That can make it a little trickier for the admissions committee to be able to say yes. And so that's a situation where if you're applying to a school that's test optional, it can be a good idea to really think about and talk with your counselor and talk with your family about whether that's a school that you want to submit your scores to. Now, I mentioned an admissions buzzword, which is the middle 50%, and that's really the metric that I like to use for helping students decide whether or not they want to submit their scores if they're applying to a test optional school. So when I say middle 50, when my admissions colleagues say middle 50, what I like to say is imagine that you take 100 students that we said yes to last year and you line them up in a row from lowest test scores to highest test scores. The 50 students in the middle of that range, that's our middle 50, meaning that there are students that we said yes to who had scores higher and there are students who had scores that were lower. But the majority of folks that we said yes to had scores and ranges within that middle 50%. Now, the good news for you is that many colleges, most colleges, mine included, will publish that middle 50% range, meaning that it is publicly available. You can Google it. You can find it on the school's website for the most part, what the middle 50% range of their SAT or ACT scores are. So if you've had the opportunity to take the SAT or the ACT, you can compare the scores you've received with those middle 50% ranges that those colleges are releasing. And then you can do some matching. You can say, am I within or above this range? Then it could be a good idea to submit my scores. Am I on the lower end of that middle 50 or below that middle 50? Maybe I hang on to my scores and take advantage of the test optional status in that case. Ultimately, it's up to you and it depends on the nuances of the individual colleges that you're applying to, but there's more information out there than you might realize that you can use to help inform your decision.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I think you actually covered every single part of that question very thoroughly. Thank you. I'm going to throw this next question over to Sarah. So one student said that they've taken the SAT twice already. During the first exam, they got a high math score, but a low verbal score. And on the second one, they got a high verbal score, but a much lower math score. Should the student submit the highest composite score test sitting, or would super scoring help them? And if you could also explain what super scoring is for those of us who might not know.
Okay, I'm going to start with the super scoring because that is the easiest part. So when you take the test multiple times, you have the opportunity for a super score. And what that means is that when Rhiannon or Jessica look at your SAT score, they're going to say, what's the best that this student did on the math section? What's the best that they did on the verbal section? And they're going to add that together to make a new composite. The same is true for the subsets on the ACT. So they'll take your science score, your English score, your reading score, your math score, and look at those sections individually. So they're really looking to do whatever is in the best interest of you and what is going to showcase you in the best possible light. That's why we say to take the test more than once, because even if you do better on one single section that day, you'll get credit for it as long as you report it in the application process. So again, you're going to take the highest sub score from each of your test dates and create a super score with that. So that can only help you in the admissions process. It is important to know that not every college super scores. So in that case, you'll want to send both scores to the institution just so that you can have the one that benefits you the most in the application process. But not every college does super score. Some colleges will super score the SAT, but not the ACT. And so you may want to ask those questions, but ultimately make sure that you report those highest scores on your application so that colleges can use them to your advantage.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. And then the last question that was submitted beforehand, I'm going to throw over to you, Jessica. So one student said that all testing dates are still canceled where they live. Will that affect their admissions for out-of-state colleges that they're applying to compared to someone else who might be applying to that school whose state's restrictions were different, allowing them to take the exam?
Thank you. So different states have different restrictions in place, and colleges and universities are completely understanding of all of the different elements that have impacted students through this process and the pandemic over the past now year and a half and going forward. So flexibility is the key. And as you've heard, I really think it is important to have a metrics in place of all of the schools you're applying to and all of the requirements. If it is a school where it is not test optional, you will really need to have a conversation with that individual school to help them understand that you want to take a test and you don't have the ability to take that test anywhere. So you may have to send additional information, maybe have your counselor also contribute toward that conversation and help the college that you're interested in who's in a different state realize that it's not an option for you and see what might be something that they can do. For the schools that are test optional, they will be able to review your application without a test score, no problem, because you have the ability to submit and complete the application process without a test score on file. I also would like to mention that in the application process, you have the ability to have additional information, personal circumstances, additional information included. And so I have encouraged students in the past where they really did want to take an exam and they've prepared for it and they feel they would do well on it and they just did not have the ability to do so. I've encouraged them to use that personal statement area of the application to share that information. Let the schools that they're applying to know that this is something that they were interested in doing, but they just did not have the ability to do so because of the restrictions in their state.
And thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and turn to some of the questions in the Q&A. And the first one I'm actually going to ask Carolyn. So there's a student who is worried that their AP subject test score does not match the course grade that they received. What advice would you give to this student? Should they send the score? Should they report it? Or any general advice?
Well, the beauty of AP scores is that they're not necessarily required in the application process. It's something that can supplement and help your application if you have, a score that is something that you would like to report. But if you have a score that, particularly if your school, and oftentimes schools on their profile will, give the percentage of students that are in a certain score range, I would apply the same sort of thing that we were talking about, that Rhiannon really said said, in terms of like the middle 50% or what's happening, if it's not something that showcases your best, sort of potential, then I would probably hold on to that score. You're not required. So at some schools, private schools particularly, you might be required to take AP exams. But for instance, I work at a public school where we can't require a student to pay the money to take an AP exam. So the college doesn't know whether you've in fact actually taking the exam or not. So if you feel like, and it's something that you would definitely want to, if you have the opportunity to talk to your counselor about that, even talking to schools themselves. But I would say that if your score is not necessarily showcasing your best potential, I would probably just hold on to that score.
Thank you, Carolyn. And actually, I'll ask Rhiannon a follow-up to that, because another question kind of goes right into that. So one registrant, or one person on the call today, asked, do colleges not like it when they see that a student has taken 6 AP classes, but they only send in 3 of their scores? Would they assume that the other 3 were not passing scores?
These are my favorite kind of questions, because I feel like I get to do a little bit of myth busting, just in that I know, sitting on the side of being the applicant, it can feel a lot like colleges are looking for reasons to say no, right? We're like, oh, you took this number of classes, but you didn't take this number of tests. That's, a mark in the no column. It's the opposite. So at least, at my institution and at the institutions here today and the coalition member schools, the conversation that we're really having is we're looking for reasons to say yes. We're trying very hard to find evidence in your application of, indications that you're going to be successful on our campus. So I'm never first going to open an application and say, I'm counting 6, AP classes, but I'm only seeing 6 scores. Something's not adding up here. Got to say no. That's not a thing that we do. In our process, actually, at Northeastern, I'm never even going to see your AP exam scores. They get submitted in a different way through a different process and a different system, and they don't factor into my evaluation of your application at any point in the admissions process. So just to really echo what Carolyn said, the colleges are looking specifically when you're taking AP or IB or honors or dual enrollment courses at those courses themselves. How are you doing in that actual class? How are you performing in that classroom academic setting? And we're not seeing that external exam evaluation. The one, little caveat or asterisk that I will add to that is that some schools like Northeastern, as part of our test optional policy, have expanded the types of tests that we'll evaluate as part of our review. So for Northeastern, if you're not able to take an SAT or an ACT test, but you have AP exam scores, you can actually submit those to us. And if you tell us you would like us to consider them, then we will in your admissions process. But it's not an automatic. It's an additional kind of layer that you can choose if you feel those scores are more reflective of your academic success than an SAT or an ACT score might be. So now that I've talked myself in a full circle, I would say the short answer to the question is do not worry if you're not submitting all of those scores. But just like Jessica said too, it's a good idea to double check with individual colleges just in case they have slightly different policies.
Awesome. So a question just came into about the essay or the writing sections of the ACT and the SAT. Can Jessica or anyone really answer how is that considered in the application process? So that writing or essay portion.
Sorry, if I could find my unmute button. You think after a year we would be able to identify that quickly? I apologize. So the writing portion, and I feel like we're echoing ourselves again. You'll want to check with the schools you're applying to, and aren't necessarily taken into consideration. Those are areas where they might be used for placement purposes upon entrance of the school. So an English course and those sorts of things, they might be used in that component. So really the schools that you're applying to, you'll want to look to see how those scores are used and at what point in the process they are used, because it may be different across the board.
Awesome. And Sarah, so there are some students who are asking about different AP scores. So a student wants to know, should they submit a 3 as an AP score to a college, or what is a good and what is a bad AP score? I think is where that's really going.
So my rule of thumb for students is to submit the 4s and 5s because those are scores that you most likely, if they accept AP credit, you will receive AP credit for. 3s are subjective by institution. If you come from a high school where not a lot of students pass with a 3 on the AP exam, then you may want to include that. But if you come from a high school where most students get 4s and 5s, then you should be reporting your 4s and 5s and leave your 1, 2s, and 3s off. And I just want to reiterate the fact that there is not a score report from College Board that goes to the colleges with your AP scores until you choose to send it. And you do not have to send those official scores until you make a decision on where you are going to enroll. So we are just now having seniors start sending those score reports to colleges so that they can receive credit or placement credit. So really and truly choose the things that are going to help your application stand out more. And the best rule of thumb I can give you is to report your 4s and 5s and leave everything else off. But if you're not sure, again, if you're in a high school where not a lot of students pass AP exams, talk to your counselor and find out. And maybe they can also help provide that additional context to the colleges, because I know there is a question about whether or not you have to ask your school counselor to provide that school report. And yes, absolutely, your school counselor will provide a school report that gives a little bit more context to your AP scores and your curriculum transcript and all of that. So don't stress about it. Don't feel like you need an explanation for everything. Your counselor will help with that as well.
And Derek, can I just add one more bit? Sarah, great information, especially as you're enrolling at the school. That's where many of those conversations are also beneficial to come into play with your academic advisor, because depending on your major and the program that you're enrolling in could also depend on the level of credit you might receive for those AP exam scores. So, there's many different major students can be choosing, and the types of classes that those AP scores may give you credit for. And some schools may give free elective credit for a 3, but replace a course at the entry level at a 4 or 5. So definitely it's beneficial at the point in time that you're enrolling and maybe registering for orientation or meeting with your academic advisor to also have those conversations to see what additional college level credit you may receive for those scores.
Awesome. And then this question I'm going to ask Rhiannon. Actually, there's a question that came into the Q&A about the relationship between colleges and College Board. But I think at the root of this question is, do colleges value AP courses and AP exams over dual enrollment classes? So could you shed a little bit of light on that?
I'm loving these tough questions. Keep them coming. This is what we're here for. And that is a plug. Keep using that Q&A box. We have some amazing coalition folks on the back end answering those as feverishly as they can. We're going to answer as many of them out loud as we can today too. So I, again, speaking only for my institution, but also trying to be a little bit general, we really like to see that in whatever environment you are in, you're challenging yourself in the subject areas that are exciting to you. That can mean a lot of different things, depending on where you live, the type of school you attend, what you're excited about, what resources you do or do not have, all of that stuff. So, for me, I attended a large public high school in a semi-rural town in Georgia, and my school had honors and AP courses, but we didn't have access to dual enrollment. We didn't have IB. So for me, I was able to kind of maximize my curriculum by taking advantage of those honors and those AP classes to the degree that my school counselor would let me, because there were limits on what we were and were not allowed to take, and in the subject areas that were interesting to me. I work with students who are taking almost entirely dual enrollment courses. I know some of Sarah's students are attending programs where they're essentially taking an entirely college level coursework as their junior and senior year, which is great because that's something they have access to. But does that mean I expect every single application that I evaluate to have that same situation? No, because every student is a unique individual and they're in individual circumstances. That's where that document that we were just talking about, that school report, really does come in and is a huge tool that admissions counselors use to help us understand the context of your environment. So that means, if you're at a school that offers IB and AP and dual enrollment and honors, yeah, we'd like to see you challenge yourself by taking advantage of some of those options. But if on the flip side, you're somewhere where you don't have any of those things and your classes are your classes and you don't get a ton of say in what you choose to take, that's totally okay too. The most important thing is for you to be really trying to maximize what you individually are taking advantage of. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. The next question that I see in the Q&A, I'm going to ask Carolyn. So most colleges are test optional for this admission cycle, but if I have the opportunity to take the test safely and I feel that I'm well prepared to take it, should I take the test?
I would say yes, because you don't have to report the score. So if you have the opportunity to take a test, because a lot of students don't even have the opportunity. And that's a completely different situation that they shouldn't feel badly about, and they should move on. And, you know, like Sarah said, there's all kinds of different ways to showcase, but it's an opportunity. That's what I would look at taking the test as, an opportunity to showcase, you know, something else, especially if it's something in which you feel like you can do well. Absolutely sit for the test. If you don't like it, you can possibly test again. Spots are, you know, sometimes very difficult to come by. And if nothing else, then you cannot send the score. So it's really, really important for you to just have as many options as you can if you're able to do that safely.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. And it looks like we have students who are tuning in from all over the country and all over the world. So I'm going to throw this question to you, Jessica, as I know that there are many international students at your institution. So one student wanted to know, IELTS or TOEFL, do universities in the USA prefer one test over another?
Again, each university is going to have different requirements based off of those different elements. So I know that at the University at Buffalo, English proficiency exams and TOEFL scores would be something that would be looked at in that application process for students. And then again, the placement of their courses once they arrive to the university would depend on those scores. But really looking at the requirements of the schools are going to be your best option of helping you decide which one is best suited for you to take.
Thank you, Jessica. And then Rhiannon, if you could just reiterate this, because I see this question coming in a couple of times in a couple of different ways, but students just really want to know, is it going to be damaging to their application if they go test optional, even if the SAT was available in their country, in their state, in their city several times?
I'm using some aggressive nonverbal feedback here, but no, it is not going to be detrimental to you if you're applying to a school that is test optional and you choose to not submit test scores. That is what test optional means. I'll pause and I'll repeat it one more time. Please know that if a college says they are test optional, meaning you get to choose whether or not you'd like to submit scores, we really mean it. So that means you get to decide whether or not you would like to submit scores. So even if you have them, even if you did have the ability to take them, if you don't like them, if you don't want them to be part of your review process, don't submit them, and it's not going to hurt you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. And Sarah, what would you tell a student if one of your students had come to you and they've taken the SAT multiple times, as the question says, let's say 5, but they only want to send 2 of those scores? Is that possible, or will colleges make them or ask them to submit all of those scores?
So on your application, you can report those 2 scores that you want to report. You do not have to report all 5. Hopefully your college participates in score choice and they super score, and then you can send your best score from College Board. That said, there are some colleges that do require you to send all 5 of those SAT sittings. However, I want you to not stress about that. That does not mean that they are going to use all 5 of those sittings. I can't tell you what they do on the back end with that information. Maybe Jessica or Rhiannon can weigh in on that, but I think it's just a setting in College Board. Do you just want to let students send 1 score, or do you require all of them? But I do know that admissions officers are looking for reasons to say yes. Rhiannon said that, and I want to reiterate that. I have been working very, very closely with so many admissions officers for so many years, and never once have they said, well, this kid took the SAT 5 times and there was this difference in their scores. They've said, you know, this student obviously did well on the SAT. What else can you tell me about them? So report your best scores in the application. Send all of the scores on College Board if it tells you that you have to, because we want to make sure that we're playing by the rules, and then focus on the other aspects of your application that you can control. That's your essay, that's putting together your activities list, all of that other information. And do not stress about whether or not they're going to look at the 5 SAT scores that you have taken with a microscope, because they're just not, they don't have the time for that.
Thank you, Sarah. So another student submitted a question about AME qualification. So I'm thinking they're talking about different math exams. So AMC, AME, all those additional tests. So from those folks that we have, Jessica and Rhiannon on the college side, how do you all look at additional tests that are not the SAT, ACT, or English language proficiency ones that are required by your institution?
Sure, I'm happy to dive in with the Northeastern perspective that I'm curious to learn from Jessica as well. So, you know, for us, generally speaking, historically, we've looked at SAT or ACT or TOEFL or IELTS if we're asking to submit those. Historically, we haven't considered, evaluated, valued any of those other exams. COVID threw a wrench into that last year, as I mentioned, and we now are giving students the option to submit some additional test scores, primarily SAT subject tests or AP exam scores, if they'd like those to be considered as part of their review process. But we're not requiring those. And there are many, many more tests out there in the world than, candidly, admissions officers are trained to know what to do with. And so we are not going to ask you or expect you to take all of these different tests and submit all of these different answers, because we know we're probably not going to do a great job of learning how to score those correctly and be able to evaluate those. And just like we were talking about, you know, controlling your controllables and all the different parts of your application, we really want to make sure that as admissions officers and as admissions committees, we're evaluating data that we know what it means. And so there might be some schools, especially if you're applying to particular in-state institutions where there might be a state exam that you have access to that those schools in-state might be asking you for. That's a separate situation. But generally speaking, a school's going to tell you if they want a test, and they're going to be pretty straightforward about what that test is and how you need to submit it. So if you've taken something but you're not seeing it mentioned on any of the websites for the schools that you're considering, it's a pretty safe bet they don't want it. But you can always check and see. You can always reach out to an admissions counselor like me or like Jessica, and we'll tell you for sure.
Ditto. I echo everything you said. I would also maybe just add, if it's something you feel very strongly about and you're proud of and you want to share that information, again, that's another area where, you know, any extra additives that you feel are positive contributions to your academic and preparation and successes that you've had, and you want those to be shared as part of the process, we're also open to allowing you to let us know about that and let us learn a little bit more. And again, that's where you can maybe turn to your high school counselor or different community-based organizations you might be working with that are familiar with that process and what you did and what you've achieved through that. And maybe it can be incorporated into a letter of recommendation or shared in another format of your application to help us understand and realize what else you've achieved through your academic journey.
I would just echo that. If you have any of those types of tests, I have a lot of students that do those types of things. One of the most important, people that you can let know what's going on with that is your counselor, because your counselor is going to have to put you in context and how many other students are doing that at your school and what your score means and what that test is. Because like Rhiannon said, the school may not know, it may be a state-based thing, it may be something else, but the counselor's job, and usually in a required recommendation, is to give the context of you within the school that you're coming from and what that test means in your area and in your state, etc. So if nothing else, that's certainly something that you should report to your counselor and help them understand so that they can help the school understand and showcase that for you.
Thank you. So one of the questions that came in is, as SAT subjects are not available anymore, and then knowing about different AP exams, it seems that students are wanting to take these exams to show their passion or to show their proficiency in a specific subject area. Even though this session is called All About Testing, if you cannot take any of those tests, what's a way that you can show your passion or your proficiency in a subject matter? And it looks like Sarah has her hand up, so I'm going to throw it over to her.
This is where your application has the opportunity to shine, but also where your curriculum choices and what you choose to take, especially during that senior year, can really stand out. So if you are the student who wants to go to medical school, have you taken the most rigorous science classes available to you to prove that you're going to be able to do some of those really tough classes like organic chemistry? Have you taken advantage of what's offered in your high school? Maybe you take a dual enrollment class at the local community college, or you highlight it through your activities and or your personal writing. I think too often students don't realize that these things that they're super passionate about, especially academic subjects, make really great, compelling application essays. Granted, you want to make sure that you are sharing the parts of you, like it's not just about the science and like the research behind it, but how does that tie into the person that you're going to be on their campus, the perspective that you're going to bring into the classroom, and then how you're going to go on to be a credit to your university. So really and truly, you have so many opportunities from the classes that you choose to take, how you spend your free time, and then definitely in your application to highlight those interests in a really meaningful way that are going to shine and be so much better than spending your time worrying about a test. So if I could tell you to do anything, is to take that excitement that you have for the test and channel it into everything else that is going to positively impact your community and your application. The test is 3 hours on one single day. What you write about and how you write about it is going to be what Rhiannon takes into committee and throws down on the desk and says, I am going to quit if we don't take Derek onto our university. And I say that knowing that from personal experience and knowing her that well. So do not think that the test is the only place that you can demonstrate your knowledge, your passion, and your competency. It comes through in every other part of the application, as long as it hits the application. But if you don't make it in the application, then it didn't happen or it didn't exist. So make sure it gets in there.
Thank you, Sarah. That was awesome. I know that Rhiannon, you had talked about earlier about that middle 50%. So a student is asking, so say that they see the published 50%, the middle 50%, and they think their grades and their essays are right on par with what the school's looking for, but they're in that bottom 25% and not that middle 50%. If the school is test optional, should they send their score or not?
So ultimately, that is a you question, my friend. You've got to make that call. I would say, honestly, candidly, knowing like Northeastern's process in particular, hang on to your score. Don't submit it. Don't let us get distracted by something that might not be a metric of your academic preparedness and success. Now, the caveat I will add to that, and this is where every school does get a little bit different and why it's good to be doing some research into the schools that you're seriously considering. There may still be some schools that want you to submit SAT or ACT scores in order to be considered for scholarship opportunities. And so I don't want you to leave money on the table and not submit your scores if that's one of those situations. Now, that can get really tricky. And that's where, again, I just want to amplify the power and brain power of folks like Carolyn and Sarah and your school counselors. This is what they do. Ask them these questions. They can really help you kind of read the tea leaves and try to figure out what's going to make the most sense for you and your academic situation and the schools you're applying to. But generally speaking, hang on to your scores. If you're below that middle 50%, that is a great time to take advantage of that test optional status. And I encourage you to do so.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. So there is another question that came in. And I don't know, I'm going to throw it out to the entire group. So Is there a place where students and families can see the acceptance rates of applicants who submitted test scores and applicants who did not submit test scores?
There is not a comprehensive resource available for this. And the amount of information and data that is going to be available is going to vary wildly. The best thing that I can tell you is to take all of it with a grain of salt. Check the college's website. If you can find it, great. If you can't, move on to something else. Get off of the message boards, looking at College Confidential specifically, and stop worrying about what everybody else is saying. If it didn't come directly from the college, it's pure speculation. So there definitely is not a comprehensive resource. Your best chance of getting relatively accurate information is going to come from the college itself. And it should not, because every pool is different, every year is different. You can't use it as any predictive measure. So focus on putting together the strongest application for you personally, with the things that you can control, and don't worry about the data. If you put together an amazing application, Jessica and Rhiannon are going to find a place for you. And if they don't, somebody else will. But if you spend all your time doing research and looking for information and data, you're doing that at the expense of putting your best foot forward. And you'll start to really get in your own head about what you actually do have to offer. So please, 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 I understand, I know the curiosity, but spend your time focusing on what you're going to bring to these amazing institutions instead of looking at the data behind whether or not you deserve to be there, because you absolutely deserve to be there. It's just a question of whether or not there's going to be enough seats at the table for everybody.
100%. And I'd also just like to put out the reminder that last year was so different, that the numbers, and even if there are percentages of how many students submitted test scores and how many students didn't, they could be so far off from what it may have looked like otherwise, because of the number of students that just weren't even able to take an exam and couldn't submit a test score. And those test scores that were submitted may have been from 2 years prior, or 1 year prior. So those numbers, even if they are published, would probably be very different in a different time and situation.
Thank you. And then one question that I'm going to ask, because I've seen a lot of them where students are dropping in their specific test scores and asking, is this good enough for admission here? Is that good enough for admissions there? Can you all just shed a little bit of light on, I guess, scores in general? Like how does a student know that they have a quote unquote good score or a bad score? And how should they go about viewing that?
I'll take a stab at that one. So from the perspective of someone who for decades has seen lots and lots of students apply to a lot of schools, again, a test score is there to validate your academic record, but it is not everything. So there are really competitive schools that if I pulled up the scattergrams or all the data from my students over the years, there might be students that have a higher test score or a lower test score that got into a really competitive college over someone that had a perfect test score. And parents and students are like, what? Like, what? How did that? Like, that's the messaging there that's really important. It's not all about the score. So sometimes that person that had a little bit lower score is way more interesting, right? Than somebody just plain and simple, right? That, wow, it is about what are you going to bring to this school? So after you reach the threshold of, I can do the work, right? So one of the jobs of the admissions office, right, and the job of the score specifically is, will you be successful in the freshman year of your attendance at that school, and nothing beyond that. So after that admissions office is able to say, you know what, this student could be successful at our place, After that, if the school is selective, it's more about what else are you bringing to the table? If you can do the work, great. Are you going to be able to play on a team? Are you going to be able to contribute to the community? Are you going to, start a business there? What are the passions that you have that make you an interesting human being that they really want to have as part of their community? Right? The test score is just simply validating, can I do the work or can I not do the work? So a little bit higher score over somebody else that has, if you have a 1430 and somebody else has a 1400, is that going to make a difference? No. Right? So you don't have to keep taking the test again so you can get like 10 more points. That's not what it's about. And if you're looking at it that way, you're really off base for what the real heart of it, of what's happening in admissions offices is really happening.
So thank you, Carolyn. So we are almost out of time, and just wanted to, I guess, go back around to each one of you all to give us a 30-second to a minute piece of advice. So you all have heard and seen all of the questions coming in and what's on the top of minds for students and families. So one last piece of advice that you would like to leave them with. And I will go in reverse of our introduction. So starting with Sarah.
Derek always loves to put me on the spot. So my best piece of advice is to take your time with your application and your essay. I know that sometimes students will be afraid to start it, or they'll be nervous and they'll wait until the last minute. And when you wait until the last minute, you'll inevitably forget things that you've done or that you have accomplished. Sometimes you'll have typos, and sometimes you'll just flat run out of time. And that's the worst thing that can happen, is running out of time on the application or submitting a half-done application or a half-done essay that hasn't had a chance to be proofread, spell checked. All of those details will matter. And there's no going back once you do that. So you want to make sure that if you're applying to Claremont McKenna, that you send them the Claremont McKenna essay and not the Pomona essay. And you've got to have enough time to do those things. And then you need to find an adult that you trust to look at these things, to make sure that you're not forgetting anything, to make sure that you're not overlooking things. Sometimes if I'm reading something that I've read, I'll read it correctly in my mind without realizing that I'm missing words. So take your time, put your time into the application. It's only July right now. I met with a student yesterday who said, I need to apply on August 1st. When August 1st the application opens, I have to have it in there first. And my answer was, no, you don't. Number one, because your transcript isn't going to be available on August 1st. So the supporting documents that we have to send are not going to be available. Number two, the amount of growth that you're going to undergo from the time you start in August, from the time you submit that last application in January or February, is going to be tremendous. So give yourself enough time and space to think through the application. I'm not saying that it has to be something crazy profound, but you do want it to be the best version of yourself. And that just takes time. And you really do need to go through a couple of iterations of a draft of an essay. Take it to someone that cares about you, and make sure that you're putting forward your best story, because you are going to tell the story that only you can tell. And the best way to stand out in the college admissions process is to be unapologetically who you are and the best version of yourself. So give yourself time, breathe. You do not have to apply on August 1st or 15th or even September 1st. Take your time.
Carolyn?
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback kind of up from what Sarah was talking about, and what we've talked about a lot here today is the individual nature of each college application and what each college wants and expects from you. And I'm going to bring that very specifically into this conversation about testing. So make sure that you understand what the policy is of every college individually. It's really easy to group everything together and just send everything to everybody. It's really important that you look understand what the policy is of that college, very specifically with regard to test scores, because they're going to look to you to say, yes, use my test scores, or don't. And a lot of colleges will not allow you to take it back. So if you say, use my test score, or if you know, and you said, they're going to use it, even if I didn't mean to, it was an accident. Slow down, be careful, understand what they mean. And if you decide that you don't want to use a test score, this happened a lot last year, and you don't send a test score, but colleges hadn't quite caught up with their automated system of saying, hey, send us your test score. Then all of a sudden students are like, oh, I have to send my test score. You may not have to. So do what both Jessica and Rhiannon both have reiterated, reach out to the school, do that research. Don't just assume. A lot of communication is automated. Go to your counselor. Reach out to someone. Don't knee jerk and send everything off to everyone. It's very, very individual. And with that, what you're going to need is time to actually go through every individual application.
And I think Rhiannon, you were next.
These are tough acts to follow. I would say, so one piece of advice is practical and logistical, and the other is more kind of big picture philosophical. I'll try to stay off my soapbox too much, but I would say logistical, practical, get yourself an organization system that's gonna work for you and make sense for you. For high school Rhiannon applying to colleges, it was one spiral bound notebook that I wrote colleges on the front of, and that's where all of it went. Notes I took from information sessions I attended, questions I had, ideas I had for essays, deadlines for different scholarships, all of it went in one place so I didn't lose it. Passwords for online account, all of it in one spot so you know where it is and you can keep track of that stuff. Spiral notebook may work for you. Google Sheet might work better for you. Maybe you text yourself these things. Whatever works for you is totally fine. Just make sure you're keeping track of this information because it's too much to try to just hang on to in your brain. You want to use your brain space for more important, big philosophical questions and stories you want to tell about yourself. So make sure you put those details somewhere so you don't lose track. In terms of big picture kind of philosophical stuff, it's really easy for me to say many years out from this process, but I do want you to know this window of time where the stress feels really acute and it's a lot to figure out, and you're deeply worried about what these random people at these other colleges are going to say or think about you as a human, this does end. This time does pass. I promise there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You will get to a place where you don't remember what your SAT or your ACT scores are. And you're going to have conversations with people who are going to be your best friends for the rest of your life. And those conversations are not going to begin with, what was your SAT score? You get to a place where it is less important than it feels right now. So know that it is important right now. You're asking big questions. You're engaging in programs like this to help you learn more. And I want you to be really proud of yourself for taking the time to do things like this. But also know that this is a point in time. And there's going to be other things that you're able to use your brain power for later. So please try not to get too hung up on one point versus another for these tests. You're going to be okay.
And last but not least, Jessica.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone else and the great insight that you've shared today. And I echo and applaud all of the participants for taking the time. That's the one of many steps that puts you ahead of everybody else that isn't taking the time to be here and learn and gather the information to help you through your academic journey and find success. So there's so many different components to the application. And I think that this has been a theme and something you've heard throughout the time we spent together this afternoon. And there's not just one thing that is going to make or break an application. So keep that in mind, stay balanced, be authentic, show your passions, express yourself. Don't leave anything on the table. If there's a gap, if you're going through and you're looking and there's something that you feel there's a little bit of a gap and it doesn't tell the whole story, find the time to tell that part of the story through your application process.
All right, thank you so much. So I know we did go a little bit over time, but wanted to draw your attention to this. So at the Coalition, we do believe in starting early and stressing less. And that's exactly what this entire workshop series has been all about. That's also the motivation behind our Path to College scholarships. So 5 members of the class of 2022 will win $1,000 for getting a jump start on their applications by July 30th. So you can find more details about this on our website at coalitionforcollegeaccess.org/scholarships. And I know I did say that this was going to be the last workshop in our series, but we do have a special event coming up on August 4th. And this is going to be through Instagram. So make sure that you do follow us on Instagram, and it's going to be a chance for you to ask us anything. So you'll be able to participate in our stories, ask us questions, and we'll be answering them throughout the day on our stories. So thank you once again to our presenters for joining us today and for the incredible words of wisdom and advice that they shared with us. And thank you to each and every one of you all who submitted questions and for watching this session. Hope everyone has a great day, a great night, a good morning, wherever you're tuning in from.